Hello, everyone. Uh, I'm Angelo Mclean, Chief Executive Officer of the National Association of Social Workers. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for joining NASW and the Council of State Governments for today's Facebook Live event, where we will discuss progress in establishing an interstate compact for the social work profession. And you know, when I say working to establish an interstate compact for the social work profession, many of us are jumping up and down saying, oh, great, great, great. It's about time. We're really pleased to be making progress in that vein. As you may know, interstate compact participating states will need to pass the legislation. So once we get a compact language that we can all agree on, then we need to do the hard work to get that legislation passed in each of the states. The Interstate Compact for Social Work licensure, there's a draft legislation that is now available for the stakeholder review and is for public comment. So as part of that public comment, we're hosting this event so we can get some stakeholder feedback. And there will be other stakeholder review sessions as well. We will walk you through the draft legislation in this session and also allow some time for questions. And those questions that are clarifying questions, those will get answered, but to the extent it's a question outside of that, we may need to just note that question and then sort of address that in sort of frequently asked questions. I want to emphasize that the voice of social workers, that your voice and the voice of social work organizations at this stage of the compact development is vital. It's really crucial that we hear from everyone in terms of what you like about the draft legislation, what concerns you might have about the draft legislation. And we encourage you to submit comments and to attend the review sessions. Comments can be submitted by individuals, or comments can be submitted by groups, like organizations. But feel free to share your comments and to express what you like about the draft legislation and what concerns you might have. You can share with your friends and colleagues, and making sure that folks in the social work community understand about this opportunity. We have been involved in this process, working closely with the Council of State Governments, the Association of Social Work Boards, and the Clinical Social Work Association. And we're looking out for social workers' interest in this process. This is something we've been working on for a number of years, and we're really thankful that they have funding from the Department of Defense, that we have guidance and leadership and technical assistance from the Council of State Governments, and we're excited that in a year from now, 2 years from now, we'll be able to proudly say we have a social work compact. We value diversity, equity, and inclusion, and we want to lift up the NASW Code of Ethics and look to our code to guide us in this work. We are asking social workers across all different settings to weigh in and to comment on the draft legislation. As you guys know, our profession is diverse. It's probably one of the most diverse professions in our nation, and our strength in our profession is our diversity. Other professions have gotten a compact, an interstate compact, and there's no reason why the social work profession can't get an interstate compact. But one of the things we want to make sure we do is get it right. We know that the devil and the angel is in the details. So we want to make sure that we take the time to get the details right. And your voice will help us do that. With all that long-winded sort of introduction that I just went through, I want to turn the meeting now over to Dr. KG, but we know Dr. Karen Goodnow affectionately as KG, Dr. KG.
Thanks, Angelo. It's great to be with you all here today. This is my first Facebook Live and several of our panelists, so this is fun to be with all of you. As Angelo said, I am Executive Director of the NASW Minnesota chapter. I happen to have a lot of passion about licensure, have done a lot of work and research in licensure, and have been a part of this work. I am co-chair of our NASW Licensure Task Force with Sarah Butts, who I'll introduce in just a moment. But I wanted to give people just a little backdrop on what we've been doing as our licensure task force. So this is a group of leaders across NASW who've been meeting for a couple of years working on things related to the future of licensure. The compact ends up taking a lot of our energy right now, which makes complete sense. This is what we need to focus on, but there's several other things related to licensure that are also moving, that are also in the works, that we have to spend some time and energy on. So I just want folks to know that the compact is one thing that's happening right now, and it's very important for us to do it and get it right, as Dr. Mclean said, but we have other work we need to do as well. So other things will be happening. In addition to tonight's session, we're doing a second follow-up session later in August, so August 31st. And in addition to that larger Facebook Live session that's open to anyone, we're also doing, several of our chapters are doing our own events. We're having lots of internal conversations around the compact and what's in the draft and what isn't and what do we like and not like and all of those sorts of things. And we'll be drafting some comments on behalf of NASW and giving some feedback. But to get that process really going, we have to listen to all of you. So several of our leaders were at the table for the drafting process, but that's a handful of people across the country. And now and there are hundreds of thousands of us. And so we as social workers all need to be tapping into sort of what's our insight across the country related to how this might play out in each of our states. And just to note too, that we're all at really different levels of understanding of the compact. There are people in this room who all you've heard is a compact, and yes, I want it, and I want to be licensed in multiple states, and I need that in order to do telehealth or whatever I'm doing in my practice. Great, let's do it. And there are other people who are really concerned about certain aspects of the compact, wanting to make sure that the semantics are just right so that it works related to our state licensure laws in every state. And so just a note that some of you might be really concerned and others are really excited, and altogether the point is we need a compact that works for our profession across the country. It is our hope tonight to hear from CSG, get a bunch of our questions answered, and figure out what you all are thinking also. And our part of the point is that NASW doesn't want this entire discussion to be led by our regulators. So regulation of social work has been a passion of NASW and social workers for decades. We were the ones who got licensure across the country in the first place, and we will be the ones, the collective we in this big room here, will be the ones to get this legislation passed in each of our states once it's finalized. So it matters to us that it works for our profession. We also are looking at this legislation through an equity lens, and we know that a deep discussion of all of the details of it is going to be necessary for all of our work. So with that, I want to hand our event over to Sarah Butts, our Director of Public Policy and co-chair of our Licensure Task Force, to share some greater context based in her work, her policy work.
Thank you, Dr. KG, and for all your leadership on this effort at NASW and National. I am the National Policy Director in our Washington, D.C. office. We coordinate very closely with our 55 chapters. NASW has one of the largest policy portfolios of any DC-based organization. We cover workforce advocacy across the various settings that social workers work, and also an array of social justice advocacy on behalf of our clients in the greater society. That really, we cover issues that range from cradle to grave, the full life course. So I just want to, I'm here because I'm a lead on this effort at the national office, but also because I cover the array of our policy advocacy and want to acknowledge that this has been a very difficult time for the profession over the last couple of years and our clients, both personally and professionally. From a policy standpoint, we have been on the front lines. You all have been on the front lines of a global pandemic as an essential workforce across many different settings, Telehealth has been scaled during this period, during this public health emergency period, and that is really a difference between us developing this interstate compact for professional practice for our profession versus other providers. That we're doing this at a time when there already is interstate practice and transformational changes in the delivery of care across settings. Also at a time when there's been a lot of difficulty in society, and we've seen restrictions on abortion access in states and reproductive health care access and gender affirming care. These are all critical, essential health care that we advocate and help to counsel our clients around. And so there's some anxiety in the profession at this juncture because social work practice, research-informed practice, and practice that's within the standard of care is actually being criminalized in some states. So just want to acknowledge that. So I'm here to be able to provide that larger policy context and to share about our work on licensure. And I just want to acknowledge that those of us that are here today, this is just a subset of a whole group of individuals that have worked to get to this point. I want to acknowledge that there's at least 10 or 15 executives at NASW within the association that have participated in various council and state government committees to get us here, and countless others. So we are not the only leadership team. This is a whole profession effort, and we absolutely need your input. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Dr. KG.
Great. Let me just share for a moment quickly, folks, what we'll be doing tonight. So we're going to hear from CSG. That is the chunk, the sort of biggest chunk of what we're spending our energy on. But then we want to hear from all of you. What are your questions? What are your comments? What are your concerns? That sort of thing. What are things you want us to discuss more? I've already lifted up to our panel a handful of things that have been churning in our discussions with our execs across the country, in our chapters, with our members, with social workers across the country. There are some big questions that have been bubbling up. And so I've lifted up some of those to this group to spend some additional energy and time really explaining to us so we understand it as best we can. And at the end of tonight's session, our hope is that you will feel prepared to share some comments with CSG, and they're going to walk you through how to do that process so you can share your comments directly with CSG. You can also, after tonight's session, go back to your state chapter if you're a member of NASW and talk to your chapter exec. You can share feedback and questions and concerns and things that you have. And each chapter's doing things a little bit differently depending on where they are in the country, what their concerns are based on their current legislation in their states, that sort of thing. So there'll be some follow-up steps that we'll share with social workers after tonight's event as well. So with that, go ahead and throughout this time while our panelists are sharing, drop your questions into the chat, and our communications team will be sorting through them and posing them back to the group once we get past the presentation part. So with that, I want to introduce our three panelists from CSG, Matthew Schaefer, Keith Buckout, and Daniel Logston. These folks are brilliant on compacts. This is what they do all day, every day. I've been in many rooms with them talking about our compact and others, and they have lots of insight to share. So Keith, are you taking it away from here? Great.
I am. Yeah. Thanks, Karen. Appreciate it. Good afternoon or evening, everyone, depending on where you're located. Thanks to Dr. Mclean, to Sarah, to Karen, and thanks to everyone at NASW. Thanks to all of you who are attending and are interested in learning more about the Social Work Licensure Compact. We really appreciate your time and think this is an important development for the social work profession. As Karen mentioned, I'm Keith Buckout. I'm a research associate for the Council of State Governments. I'm joined today by Deputy Policy Director for the CSG National Center for Interstate Compacts, Matt Schaefer, and the Director of the National Center for Interstate Compacts, Dan Logston. Along with a team of stakeholders in the profession, CSG has been engaged in developing the Social Work Licensure Compact for a little over a year now, and we're excited to share the initial draft with you today. Before we get into, I guess I should ask the communications team, who has been very helpful, to go ahead and start putting up the slides, if that's okay. Great. So next slide, please. Yeah, so before we get into the specifics of the Social Work Licensure Compact, here's a little bit about who we are at the Council of State Governments. CSG is a national membership organization for elected and appointed state officials. We're the only organization serving all three branches of state government, and we support our members through providing policy research, technical assistance and analysis, and convening our members together to learn from one another. Next slide, please. In 2004, CSG launched a policy program aimed at helping states collaborate and develop solutions for multi-state problems called the National Center for Interstate Compacts. NCIC, as we call it, is a research-based and member-driven technical assistance center, which facilitates the consideration, creation, and revision of interstate compacts as solutions to multi-state problems. So NCIC has facilitated the development or consulted on the development of all of the active occupational licensing compacts that exist. So, next slide. So what is an interstate compact? That's the best place to start before we get into the specifics of the social work compact. An interstate compact is a constitutionally authorized, legislatively enacted, legally binding contract between two or more states. Those three things are important. Compacts are typically, administrative compacts are typically used to administer regulations that are common between multiple states. So the best example of an administrative compact and a good model to sort of describe how the social work compact, sort of a loose framework for how the social work licensure compact will work is the photo on the slide. A driver's license. Your driver's license is issued by the state in which you live, your home state, but it authorizes you to drive in every other state. There is no federal driver's license law that made that happen. That's because there is a driver's license compact. So next slide, please. Since 2016, the National Center for Interstate Compacts has been actively working with states and licensed professions to develop occupational licensing interstate compacts. Compacts create a streamlined pathway for licensed professionals to practice in multiple states. That's that first box there. And that's just allows professionals to engage in multi-state practice without having to maintain licenses in every single state in which they want to practice. So you have one licensure process rather than 2, 5, 10, 13, whatever. And so it's important to note that this doesn't remove the power of each state to issue single state licenses. They're still free to do that. But this is an additional pathway where a licensed practitioner can practice in all of the compact member states without having to go through each member state's licensure process. Also, as you can see at the bottom of the slide, there's some statistics describing the utilization of these compacts. And as you can see, they've been very popular in recent years and are a proven tool. Next slide, please. So there are currently 9 active occupational licensing interstate compacts. The most popular of which, and maybe you've heard of it, is the Nurse Licensure Compact. That was the first out the door in 2016. I do want to note that the compacts with lower membership are not less popular for any reason other than they're just generally newer. So these compacts take a little bit of time to gain momentum and pile up enactments in the states. So next slide, please. These are the new compacts that CSG is currently working to develop. Except for the compact for physician's assistants, the other professions listed here are being developed under a cooperative agreement between CSG and the Department of Defense. Why does DoD care about this issue? It's because military families are highly mobile. On average, they get relocated to a new duty station every 2 to 3 years. That makes working in a licensed profession very difficult. But that being said, these compacts are open to all licensees, not just military spouses. We did create this compact with military families in mind, and there are specific provisions we'll discuss later. But I do want to note that it's not just for military families. This is open to all licensees on the social work profession. Next slide, please. This slide outlines CSG's compact development process. And there's a lot of information on this slide. And that's why I'm actually going to hand things over to our director, Dan Logsdon, and he'll talk a little bit about how we develop compacts and describe a little bit about how stakeholder review works.
Thanks, Keith. Sorry, we're going to go through most of this slide. We usually let people off the hook, but it's important to understand that we've had people approach us in the past from certain professions and say, we'd like to hire you and one of your attorneys, and, our attorneys, can we all sit in a room and write the compact? And the answer is no. We don't work like that. We are a membership organization from the states, so the states have to be at the table. In order to make a compact effective, it's got to serve the needs of everyone. So that's why we include the professions. But, regulators do play a key point. They're the ones that are going to have to implement it. And this is based on licensure. So, we'll try to get legislators involved, typically not in the drafting part, but, we start out with a larger group. That group sort of, sets the guardrails, offers some specifics that they'd like to see in the compact if possible. Once we get that information from that group, their work's finished for a while, they turn it over to a document team. So that's mostly attorneys, but, certainly not all attorneys. And, they work with CSG and staff to create the document. And that typically takes 3 to 4 months. And once we finish that document, we'll take it back to that original group, give them a preview of it. If they have some comments, we'll take those into consideration. We don't really like to change it before stakeholder review, but, if a consensus is, there, we'll go ahead and change it. And then we go out for stakeholder review for, about 8 weeks, sometimes 10 weeks, depending on the level of interest. This is important because once interstate compacts get to the legislature, they can't be changed substantively. So, some states, like Maryland, has a statute on the books that, they don't use shall not, they use may not, and they mean the same thing. Fine. But bill drafters always like to make changes to bills. Legislators sometimes like to make changes to bills. They can't do that with these licensure compacts. So the states expect us to vet it thoroughly. That's why we do such a robust round of stakeholder review. So we'll take all the feedback that we get. Keith will catalog it and compile it and catalog it, and then we'll put it in front of the document team first. We'll make them go through every bit of it. They'll think about what was recommended, if changes were recommended, if there's points of confusion. They'll tighten up that language. They may even change the language at various points. So, that stakeholder review is important and the feedback's important. So we encourage you to give us that feedback. Then, once we've got a document that with the document team that we feel is, close to final, ready to present to the technical assistance group, we'll convene them. We'll reach a consensus on the document. We always do. And then we're ready to go to the states. And so for the DOD project, we'll convene a legislative summit. We'll have a website with, a legislative resource kit on there and a tracking mechanism. And then, we release it to the states. So, again, the states can't change the legislation. They're used to seeing that for the most part. Most states have adopted at least one licensure compact. Over half the states have adopted at least 3. Some states, have adopted, 7 and 8 and 9. But we will, the legislature will look at it. It'll very likely go through occupational licensure committees. Once we get to the requisite number of states in the document to start standing the commission up, then we'll move on to phase 3, but you never really leave phase 2 because that's where you get the state enactments. And the Interstate Commission, all modern compacts have interstate commissions. Some of the older ones don't. And, it's real problematic for them to operate. The commission is just there to interpret and implement the compact. They just administer the compact. They can't dictate policy to the states. They can't take action against the practitioner. They're just an administrative agency for the compact because it's going to need that. And again, they start their operations. They'll create the data system. They'll start passing bylaws and rules and setting the parameters for how the compact's going to work. That typically takes 12 to 14 months. I know some of you may be frustrated that this takes so long, and we're sorry about that. But anything worth doing is worth doing properly. These compacts do a lot of things. They allow practitioners to engage in, borderless or modified borderless practice. They protect the regulators' interest. We didn't leave the regulators behind. We've all seen instances where Congress or a legislature passed a bill. They didn't think about the regulatory aspect. And then, we get, the financial crisis like we got in 2008. So we're actually enhancing the regulator's ability to protect the public, because that's the only reason you give somebody a license, is to be able to take it away from them if they're not following the Practice Act. In this era where, you're dealing with a borderless practice for a practitioner. So again, regulator has no more power than they had before. It's just they can coordinate with other states that are in the compact to deal with any sort of disciplinary issues. So we're not creating some sort of super regulatory board. Again, the commission can't take action against the practitioner, and it can't dictate policy to the states. So you never leave phase 2. Phase 3 is critical for standing up that compact commission. This is the process. One of the last things that a compact does is, and this is something that legislators are very interested in. We had a session with a lot of legislators in Atlanta last month about the teaching compact. And, we didn't get any questions about how it worked. We got questions about cost, and we got questions about rulemaking, and we got questions about state sovereignty. So, compacts protect state sovereignty. That's why states like them so much. It's doing a number of things: protecting state sovereignty, providing a pathway for practitioners to work in other states without having to be licensed there, and then, not diminishing a regulator's ability to protect the public, which is why a board exists, is to protect the public. So again, know it takes a while. We apologize for that, but we have to get these right because, they're doing a lot of work. But once they're up and going, they're built to last. So I think the next slide, please, is mine as well. Okay, so again, we talked about stakeholder review. This is critical. Again, states expect us, legislators are beginning to understand that, they can't change these documents, or at least they can't change them substantively. So they understand that. And so the onus is on us to vet it thoroughly. Legislators are used to hearing, someone come into their office or catch them in a hallway and say, I don't like this legislation for this reason or that reason. Where they will run the other way on you, where they will turn their back on supporting you, is when somebody approaches them and says, they wrote this thing in the back room. We weren't allowed to see it. Once they finish it, they just rolled it out. We've only seen it since it's been filed here. That can cause a lot of problems. Those of you that work with legislatures know that. So that's another reason we do so much such a long period of stakeholder review. Also, again, we want your comments, and the document team and the technical assistance group, they may not agree with everything that's submitted, but CSG will make them look at everything that's submitted, so they'll see it. Don't worry, we're not going to put it in a file somewhere and just say that we made them go through it. They'll actually go through it. But there's lots of instances where somebody will point something out that we weren't thinking of, or that, they'll say this is confusing. And once we start looking at it, they're right. It is kind of confusing. We do need to clear that up. So, your feedback is incredibly important. So we're doing a number of virtual meetings. We've got a standing meeting, I think, every week to go through the compact. That's really to help educate you about it, so you can provide the feedback, with more information. And then, again, once we get all of that feedback, Keith, the rest of us will catalog it, get it to the folks on the project team. And again, they'll go through every bit of it. So don't worry about, I'm going to submit this and no one's ever going to see it. I promise you they'll see it. This doesn't work if we don't provide all the information to the project team. Again, they may not take any action on your suggestion, but they're definitely going to see it, and they'll definitely talk about it. So again, once that's finished, it's ready to go to the states. And legislators, again, are typically comfortable with the fact that we've vetted this, and they'll get over the fact that they can't change it. Sometimes in some states that goes over a little bit better than others. So I think now I'm going to transition over to Matt, and he'll go through an outline of what the compact is. And you're going to get refer to a page with resources on it where you can see the document and then provide feedback. And we encourage you again to do that. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Dan. Good evening, everybody. My name is Matt Schaefer. I'm the Deputy Policy Director at the CSG National Center for Interstate Compacts, and excited to be with you all this evening talking about the Social Work Compact. And it's what everybody's here for, is a kind of a look into what the actual language looks like that we've been talking about so far. So you've got a good background on what interstate compacts are. You've heard a little bit about the development process, and now we're ready to actually talk about what's in it. So we can move on to the next slide. Okay, so I wanted to start with some commonly used terms that you're going to see throughout the document. So we're not going to actually pull up the compact and go through the legislation line by line tonight. I would invite you to attend one of the weekly review sessions that Dan mentioned if you wanted to engage in that activity. Tonight, we're just going to talk about a lot of the important provisions that we feel like are important for social workers. So if you're reviewing the draft and you see these terms, just wanted to make sure that you all had a good grasp of what we're talking about here. So you'll see the term regulated social worker quite a bit. And all this means is just a social worker who holds a license to practice. So regardless of the title that is used in your state, regardless of the category of practice, a regulated social worker in the compact encompasses any social worker who holds a license. So we're attempting via this compact to include bachelor's practice, master's practice, and clinical social work all in this compact. And so this umbrella term, regulated social worker, is what the drafting team chose to use to describe just a licensed social worker generally. And we didn't use the term licensed social worker because recognize that some states do call it different things, a certification or something else. So that's what that term means. Home state. So your home state is a state that is a member of the compact where the regulated social worker lives, where your primary domicile is. It's where you vote. It's where your driver's license is, like the example that Keith gave earlier. So that is your home state. It's where you live, and your home state has to be a member of the compact in order for you to be able to participate. You'll also see the term remote state often. And a remote state just means any compact member state that's not your home state. So if there's 39 states in the compact, like the nursing compact, you have one home state and you've got 38 other remote states that you can practice in. So it just refers to all of the states where you don't live, but you have authorization to practice there because of the compact. The interstate compact license, that's the next term you see here on the screen. That is what the social worker is applying to receive that authorizes you to practice in other member states of the compact. So you're going to go to your state board, you're going to say, I want an interstate compact license. They're going to verify your application. They're going to issue you that interstate compact license, which allows you to practice in all of the other member states. So that's the thing that you're applying to receive. And I'll emphasize here on this point that this is not in addition to holding a regular single state license that you have right now, but this would essentially replace that license. So you would not need to hold, I live in the state of Kentucky. So if I was a social worker using the compact, I would not need to have a Kentucky social work license and an interstate compact license. I only need, if I want to be mobile, I only need an interstate compact license. And that punches my ticket to practice in my home state of Kentucky and then also the other remote states. Multi-state authorization to practice. This again is just the authorization that is granted to you by holding an interstate compact license to practice in a particular remote state. So we'll talk about how adverse action works in terms of the compact, but a remote state has the ability to revoke your authorization to practice in their state, but they don't have authorization to do anything regarding your ability to practice in other states. So they can't touch your interstate compact license and they can't tell another state what they should or should not do with your authorization to practice there. All they can do is say, we don't want you to practice in our state because of XYZ action that was taken. And so that's what we're referring to when we say multi-state authorization to practice. It's just your ability to practice in one single remote state. And then the Compact Commission. So Dan talked about the commission. It is the governing body that is established through the compact that actually effectuates the provisions of the compact. So it administers the compact on an ongoing basis, develops rules and bylaws. A lot of the things that come up in terms of compact governance are too narrow and too specific to actually put in the compact language. We can't foresee every issue that the compact is going to face, and so a lot of things are left to the discretion of the commission just writing a rule to solve that issue. It's much faster, much easier than changing the statute that we're going to talk about tonight. And so the commission is made up of members of the member states of the compact, representatives from the member states. So if there's 39 states in the compact, like nursing, there's going to be 39 commissioners, one person from each state, and we'll talk about who's eligible to sit on the commission on a later slide. So those are just some terms that I wanted to point out for you all that you'll see pretty often throughout the legislation. Next slide, please. Okay, so here's just a broad overview of how the compact works from like a 10,000 foot view. So I'm licensed in my home state. Here it's state A, so I'm a social worker. I apply to my home state's licensing authority for an interstate compact license. So this is just your state board, your board of social work. So you go to your board and you say, I want an interstate compact license. The home state is going to confirm that you're eligible. There's some eligibility criteria that we'll talk about here in a few slides. So the home state just confirms, they receive your application and confirm that you're eligible to participate, and then they issue you the interstate compact license. And so the interstate compact license grants you authorization to practice in your home state, and then also all of the other remote states that are part of the compact. So that's from a very high level view, that's how this works. And again, your home state is the only one that can take any kind of action against your license because they're the one that issued it. So there's no remote state that can take action against their license, against your license, because they don't have jurisdiction over it. Only the home state that issued it has jurisdiction to act against your license. The remote state can remove your ability to practice in their particular state, but they can't do anything to your license itself. So at a very high level, that's how it works. Next slide. Okay, so again, just to hammer home this point a little bit more, it functions just like your driver's license or similar to your driver's license, that analogy that Keith gave earlier. You hold one interstate compact license and you have authorization to practice in all the other member states. So you can see here the 5 states listed. So you have one interstate compact license and you have ability to practice in Alabama, Alaska, Arizona, and any of the other compact member states through your one interstate compact license that's issued by the home state. Next slide. Okay, so we're going to get into some of the requirements for joining the compact. And the first thing we're going to talk about are the state requirements to join the compact. So these are not requirements for the licensee. This is not a requirement for the social worker. This is a requirement for the state. So how should a state regulate social work in order to be a compact member state? And so first thing is that you see here is license and regulate social work for one of the following categories: bachelor's, master's, or clinical social work. And so this is an important point to emphasize again, is that this is not saying that you need to regulate all 3. It's just saying that you need to regulate one of the following. We know all 50 states regulate clinical social work, so all states should be eligible to join the compact in terms of this provision. There's a little bit of variance in terms of which states license bachelor's and master's practice. But all we're saying is that you have to license one of the following 3. So this compact is attempting to try to include all categories of practice. So you would have an interstate compact license that corresponds to the category of practice issued by your home state. Okay, number 2 here, require that licensees graduate from an accredited social work program corresponding to the category of licensure sought. So again, this is BSW for the bachelor's category, MSW for master's or clinical. And these are accredited social work programs. We've gotten some questions about what if I hold a license, but I didn't graduate with a degree in social work? The drafting team did feel strongly about having this as a requirement that the state needs to require for licensure that the social workers graduate from an accredited program corresponding to their category of licensure. Okay, number 3, require that licensees pass a qualifying national exam corresponding to the category of licensure sought or other competency assessment approved by the commission. And so we get a lot of questions on this point. What do we mean by qualifying national exam? So I'll talk a little bit about that here. We use the umbrella term qualifying national exam for several reasons. First, so the prevailing national licensure exam in social work is the ASWB exam. We don't want to specifically name ASWB in the compact statute itself, because what if in 20 years or 30 years there are new examination practices in the social work profession, and the ASWB exam is no longer required in states? We don't want to have to go back and rewrite the compact from scratch because we had a specific requirement here for the ASWB exam. And so that's why we use this umbrella term, qualifying national exam, and then also giving the caveat to the commission to approve other competency assessments. So let's say in the future, there's some sort of new social work assessment. Maybe it's not even an exam. Maybe it's some sort of apprenticeship assessment or something. The commission could potentially approve that as satisfying this requirement as passing a qualifying national exam. So those are the types of considerations that the document team had when drafting the language around this term, qualifying national exam. But I will say broadly, if you pass the ASWB exam, you're good. If your state requires the ASWB exam for licensure, you're good. And the majority of states do have the ASWB exam as a requirement for licensure. Currently, we're just trying to look into the future and not make sure that this is able to be evergreen and grow with the profession. Number 4, require clinical category of regulated social workers to complete a period of supervised clinical practice. So this is not specifying a specific number of hours. This is just saying that the state has to require that clinical social workers undergo a period of supervised clinical practice. So it doesn't matter if your state is at 3,000 hours or 4,000 hours for clinical. Both of those states would be eligible to join because they do require some sort of a period of supervised clinical practice. Next slide. Okay, a couple other things to note here. These are more ongoing obligations that a state has to meet in order to maintain their membership. So it's not things that the state has to currently have in place, but more ongoing obligations. So they have to notify the commission of any disciplinary actions taken against a licensee. It's just a fundamental concept for the compact working how it should. You're notifying the other member states that something happened in your state. They have to comply with the rules of the commission. So the commission, like I said, is going to promulgate rules, and the member states have to comply with those rules. They have to implement a procedure for a criminal background check of applicants for licensure. Understand that a lot of states in social work regulation don't currently have this in place, but this is something that the document team did feel like was necessary for the compact, was that states would require a background check for applicants. And then participate in the data system. So this has been mentioned a couple of times. there's going to be a compact data system that houses information about licensees using the compact. So it's going to have general demographic information, your name and where you're from, and then information about your license, any kind of history that you have on your license in regard to discipline, and then any type of applicable information about exam scores, transcripts, things like that. So all that stuff is going to live in the data system. And so all this is saying is that as a state, you're required to participate in that data system. You're not allowed to just not participate and give the other states information about licensees in your state. In order for the compact to work, all the states have to participate. Next slide, please. Okay, so here's where we get into the eligibility requirements for social workers. So the number one requirement that you see here is that social workers hold an active and unencumbered license in your home state that's a member of the compact. So keys to emphasize here is that the license is active and unencumbered and that it's issued by your home state. And there's a lot of reasons for why the drafting team felt like the home state requirement was necessary, and maybe during the Q&A we can get into some of those specifics. Again, graduation from an accredited social work program corresponding to the category of licensure sought, so BSW or higher for bachelor's, MSW or higher for master's or clinical. Number three, passage of the national qualifying exam. So we have here that the social worker is required to pass the national qualifying exam. We've talked about what that means. There is a provision at the end of this section that says that the commission may promulgate a rule to exempt those who were licensed prior to the ASWB exam being required for licensure. So if you've held an active and unencumbered license for, let's say, 15 years, but you were licensed prior to when the ASWB exam was required, we're directing the commission to draft a rule so that you would be exempted, so that you don't have to go back and take the ASWB exam. You've demonstrated through 15 years of competent practice that you should be eligible to participate in the compact. And then lastly here, clinical social work, we have a requirement around 3,000 hours or 2 years of full-time postgraduate supervised clinical practice. And so 3,000 hours was kind of the baseline based on our research for states' requirements around clinical supervised practice for CSWs. So 3,000 was kind of the baseline that most states agreed with. I know there's a couple states that are less than that, New York and Florida. And in those instances, the social worker would just have to provide evidence that they have completed at least 3,000 hours. So the state is still eligible to join because we don't have any hours requirements in the state section. The practitioner just needs to show evidence that they completed that 3,000 hours of supervised practice, even though their state requires less for licensure. Next slide, please. Okay, so a couple more here. So the practitioner is required to have a unique identifier that's going to be determined by the commission. And this is just to cut down on instances of fraud, to make sure that you are who you actually say you are in the data system. Pay all required fees related to the application. We'll talk about fees in detail during the Q&A portion, but there are fees for getting an interstate compact license. Complete continuing competency requirements of the home state. This is an important thing to emphasize that we often get questions about is, well, do I have to do CEs in all the remote states where I'm practicing? And the answer is no. You're only required to do CEs in your home state. So your renewal cycle syncs up with how it currently works in your home state. So if you're on an annual renewal cycle or maybe every 2 years, that's when your interstate compact license would renew. And that's when you would complete continuing education if it's required for your home state. But you do not have to complete continuing ed in all of the remote states in which you're practicing in. A couple more here: notifying the home state of any adverse action taken by a non-member state on any license within the past 30 days, and then agree to abide by the laws, regulation, and scope of practice in the state where the client is located at the time of service. So this is an important thing to emphasize. I don't think it's something that we've talked about yet, is that as far for purposes of the compact, if you're thinking, well, my scope of practice in my home state is different from a lot of the other states out there. Scope of practice is dictated by wherever the practice takes place. So if I'm licensed in my home state of Kentucky, let's say I'm seeing a client via telehealth in the state of Kansas, I have to abide by Kansas's laws and rules. I have to abide by their scope of practice while I'm seeing that client in the state of Kansas. And so it doesn't matter where you are physically. In terms of telehealth, it matters where the patient or client is located. In terms of in-person practice, it's just wherever the practice takes place. So uh, if I'm licensed in the state of Texas and I'm practicing in person across the border in Oklahoma, I have to abide by Oklahoma's laws and rules. So that's how that works. And it's incumbent upon you as the practitioner to know what you can and can't do while you are in the state of Oklahoma. So if there's certain things that you can do in Texas that you're not allowed to do in Oklahoma, you got to know what you're allowed to do when you're in a remote state. Next slide. Okay, so important provision to point out here, it's section 5 of the compact. So we've talked about this requirement for you need to have a license in your home state. Well, what if you change your home state? What if you want to move? What if you're changing your primary state of residence? There is a provision here in the compact, and it's section 5, for transferring your license between two compact member states if you are changing your state of residence, if you're moving. So I will emphasize here that this is an opt-in for states. The document team that we were working with felt like it was a little heavy-handed to dictate states have to license somebody who hasn't gone through the licensure process in that state. But we did include it here as an opt-in. So states may incorporate this provision for a license transfer. So essentially how it would work is you would tell your old home state, I'm moving to this new state that's in the compact. The remote state, or your old home state would deactivate your old interstate compact license, and your new home state would issue you a new interstate compact license. It's issued by your new home state, and all you'd have to do is undergo a new background check and complete any required jurisprudence. So some states have requirements that you complete class on their constitution or their laws and regulations. And so the drafting team felt like it was good to include that as a requirement, but that's it. That's all you have to do. You don't have to go back and provide any exam scores or transcripts or any kind of primary source verification. All you have to do is just undergo a background check and complete that jurisprudence, and you have a new license in that new state that you've moved to. But again, this is an opt-in provision, and we're not dictating that states have to do this, but it's optional. Next slide. Okay, so that is really the end of all of the sections that are really specific to social work. The back half of the compact, we call this the boilerplate language. It really doesn't change a whole lot from compact to compact. You'll see section 7, which talks about adverse action, looks very similar to how the nursing compact looks or how the counseling compact works. So we wanted to focus a lot of our attention today on those front half provisions, sections 1 through 6. But we wanted to give you a sense of what these sections are all about. So section 7 is about adverse action. So this is particularly important for the regulators to understand, but we've talked about this concept of what can a home state do to your license versus what can the remote state do to your license. So this outlines the process for who has jurisdiction over what. So again, the home state can only take action on your interstate compact license. The remote state can say, we don't want you to work in our state for maybe a set period of time. but they can't do anything to your interstate compact license. Only the home state can, and that's because the home state is the one that issued it. So Section 7, in regards to adverse action, talks about that process. Section 8 is the establishment of the Interstate Compact Commission. So again, we've talked about the commission. We've talked about this governing body that oversees and administers the compact. The most important thing to emphasize here, and I mentioned that we were going to get to this, is who is eligible to sit on the commission. And so we say here that the member states are allowed to appoint one delegate to the commission, and it must be a member of the state's licensing authority, which means the licensing board, who's either a regulated social worker, a public member, or an administrator of the licensing authority or their designee. So a licensed social worker, a public member of the board, or the board executive director. Those are kind of the three options that a state has when they're considering who's going to sit on this commission. Section 9 deals with the data system. So we've talked about the data system. The commission is going to develop a data system. It's going to house information about licensees that allows for information exchange for states across that are members of the compact. Section 10 deals with rulemaking. So there's provisions in here for the commission to write rules. Again, like I said previously, a lot of these things are too specific to include in the compact legislation. And so we have provisions for the commission that allows them to draft rules that can, they can respond to things that occur that are maybe a little too narrow or too specific to address in the compact legislation. Next slide. Section 11, oversight, dispute resolution, and enforcement. So just as any other contract between two parties, it needs to be enforced by all the members of the parties. And so Section 11 outlines the process for what if there's a state that's not holding up their end of the bargain? What if they're not in compliance? And so Section 11 outlines the process for how member states resolve disputes with one another around compliance and enforcement of the compact's provisions. Section 12 talks about the effective date of the compact and also has provisions for withdrawal and amendment. So you can remove yourself from the compact as a state. And you can also, the states can collectively amend the compact. So this is very rare. We hardly ever see states withdrawing themselves from the compact. It's actually only happened one time in all of the 9 active licensure compacts. But there's also the effective date here in Section 12. And so we say that the compact is going to come into effect when it's passed by the 7th member state. So that's when the compact will be formally implemented. That's when the commission will be established. And that's when we'll start issuing interstate compact licenses, is when the 7th state passes the compact. Section 13 is around construction and severability. So just like any other contract, this agreement can be severed collectively by all the member states. And then lastly, Section 14, the binding effect of compacts and other laws. This section just clearly says that the compact is binding on all the member states, that it supersedes any state laws that are conflicting, and that the rules of the commission are binding on all the member states. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of sense of what all these other sections are about. If you're reviewing this from a social worker lens and you want to just focus on the sections that are really particular to social work, I'd encourage you to really focus your attention on those beginning sections, sections 1 through 6, really. So I'll go to the next slide here. Okay, and we can skip over this one. Okay, so in terms of next steps, I'll just briefly touch on this, and then we'll dive into the Q&A portion. So we've talked about this quite a bit, but we're hosting these weekly review sessions to review all the provisions of the compact. If you're interested in this and you want to actually go line by line with us through all of the provisions, that's the avenue for when we do that. And those are every Monday at 3 p.m. Eastern, and you can see on our project website how to register for those meetings via Zoom. We're also going to be presenting to stakeholder groups. So we've got a presentation with CSWA later this week. We're going to be presenting to ASWB and CSWE as well. So if you're a member of one of these organizations, maybe you're a member of a state chapter and you want CSG to do a similar presentation, feel free to reach out and we can and make something work there. And again, we're inviting everybody to submit feedback via the online survey that is also on the project website. So if you have particular thoughts about any of these provisions that we've talked about today, feel free to fill out that survey. And then, like Dan said, we're going to share it with the development team and then make changes to the compact as necessary. And we'll release the compact to the states in 2023. Next slide. Okay, just a little bit more about the survey. There's the website for the compact, and then also the link to the SurveyMonkey survey. It's just SurveyMonkey/r/social work compact. Next slide. Okay, so we've got plenty of time for question and answers. We've got some commonly asked questions here. I think I'll probably just skip this slide, and I think we've gotten lots of questions in the chat, and so we'll probably just start with the questions that we've already received in the chat. So
Yeah.
I'll hand it back over to Dr. KG.
Hey, thanks, Matt and team. We really appreciate you doing such a thorough overview. There's lots of comments and thoughts in the chat about just saying thank you for answering some things ahead of time. Some of you might be thinking, okay, the question I put in the chat, they answered later in the session. So I'm going to give a bit of summary and kind of a big picture backdrop of many of the things that you covered sort of in simple language for all of us. And while I'm doing that, if folks in the audience, or maybe right when I'm done, if you have questions that are still bubbling up for you, if you would go back into the chat and let us know exactly what you want us to spend some more time on, that would be super helpful. So let me dive into a few things here. So first is one person had commented, I'm so surprised that there are not more social workers attending this event. Part of that is because CSG is doing a great job of hosting many events like today. So there are weekly sessions that CSG is hosting that several hundred people have already been on. And so there's lots of opportunities for people to hear the content and respond. NASW is trying to do our part and hosting a session that feels like is ours and answers the questions that we really have. And as I said, we'll have another one in August. And then lots of our chapters and our licensing boards and others are doing our own events as well. So lots of us are trying to wrap our brains around this. As backdrop, folks, it is CSG's job. So our team that's here from CSG tonight, it's their job to get a compact drafted that will work legally and that can be passed in our states. Okay, so they've worked on several of these. They have lots of insight into what works and what doesn't, into the sort of the big picture of compacts nationally. But they don't know social work the way that we do. And social workers are really interested in protecting our practice. There's definitely some nuances in our profession that are different from other professions. CSG's talked about that many times throughout my work with them. And that's precisely why we're all reviewing this and providing feedback individually. And a reminder, folks, that professional licensure is devolved to our states. So every state has the authority to set their own professional regulation standards. Someone had commented in the chat that there's difficulty in client stability when clients move from state to state, and because of our licensure regulations being different in state to state, and that's true. And that's exactly why that we collectively as a profession want to pass a compact. We would like to pass a compact or to draft a final compact that we can all pass in our states to actually make it useful. It will only be useful if lots of our states have it, okay? But we also know that some won't. Some states up until now have been holdouts in passing compacts. And a reminder, your state will have to pass the legislation in order for social workers in that state to be in the compact. Now, whether the compact's in your state or not, let me just give a little backdrop of what you can and can't do. You can still just get licensed in your home state and get licensed individually in any other state that you want to try to get licensed in, just like you can right now. Or once the compact's in place, you can also get licensed in your home state and join the compact if your state has it, And you can also get individually licensed in other states individually that are not in the compact. But our hope would be that lots of states would pass this so that you won't have to do all of that individual state licensing. The way our compact is written is more like nursing and less like all of the other compacts, in the sense that social workers would be paying one fee to their licensing board to be in the compact, and then would have access to all of the states in the compact. So different from SIPAC, different from several other compacts where people are still picking and choosing which states they want to practice in within the compact, ours is not written that way. So we could have CSG talk about that more if people have questions on it. And a reminder, this will take some time before the draft is finalized, before 7 states pass it, before the commission gets going, before people can actually be licensed through it. Now, I heard Dan say something like 15 months, maybe? And that was the first I'd heard a timeline. I've been telling people a couple years probably before we actually have a compact in place that people can get licensed through. So remember, states have to pass it first, and then it gets up and going. Now, if your state passes the compact and you want to get into it, you'll have to pay a fee and do some paperwork through your home state. And you'll have to meet your home state licensure requirements and to complete all of the renewal requirements, supervision requirements, those sorts of things in your home state. You may also have to complete jurisprudence requirements in other states that you want to practice in through the compact. So that is sort of the one additional caveat to what else you would have to do to meet compact requirements in other states. So you're not going to have to look at each state and say, okay, what are supervision requirements here? What are exam requirements there, that sort of thing. If you get in through your home state, you get a compact license, then jurisprudence would be the only add-on thing that you'd have to pay attention to in those additional states you would practice in. A couple other notes, and then I'm ready for our team to start some Q&A here. This event is being archived on our page for future viewing. We encourage people to share it. We will also post it on our NASW website. And our communications team is going to post that link into the chat also. Now, again, if there's anything that you heard today that you love about the draft of the compact, to let CSG know that in the survey to keep it. If there's something that you saw or you heard that feels problematic to you, maybe it's those numbers of hours it takes for full-time clinical practice. I mean, there's all sorts of nuance to it. Let them know very specific feedback that you have as well. Okay, so now, any other questions that have bubbled up for people since, yeah, you're welcome. All right, comms team, do we have some questions from our audience that we should take? All right. So common question, are all levels of licensure included? Keith, do you want to take that?
Sure. So it depends on how you define all levels or categories of licensure. So the effort for the technical assistance group and the document team was to include bachelor's category practice, master's category practice, and clinical level practice. And so we endeavored to create a compact that would include all 3 of those. If a state does not necessarily license all 3 of those, they can still join the compact at the categories at which they currently license. We understand that there are a few states, some states offer macro licenses or other administrative type licenses. The technical assistance group and document team reviewed those issues and ultimately decided that those would be a little bit too complex and there wasn't enough consistency in the states to include them in the compact. But we did endeavor to create a compact that includes as many licensed social workers across the country as possible.
So the only ones that are not named in the compact currently are macro practice social workers. And in some states like Minnesota, that is included in our master's level folks. Some states have a standalone macro license, but that at this point is the only group that's not specifically called out in the compact. Thanks for that.
Thanks
Keith.
for that question.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so I'm seeing lots of questions in the chat here. Are there testing and background check requirements? Which person from your team wants to take that one?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that. So kind of like I said in the overview, There is a requirement in the compact that social workers will have passed that qualifying national exam. And again, we define that as a national licensing examination, which is currently the ASWB exam. That's the only national licensure examination that's administered right now. And there is the provision for the commission to have a legacy provision for people who have held an active and unencumbered license, and that would be up to the commission to determine how that operates. If they want to set a number of years of practice, like 5 years or something, we didn't get that specific in the compact language. So there are testing requirements, but there is the potential for an exemption if you've held a license prior to when the ASWB exam was required in your state. And there is also a background check requirement. That was something that the document team felt like was necessary. And so if your state doesn't currently require a background check, they would need to implement a background check process. And again, this important note to emphasize, this wouldn't be a background check for your general licensee population. It would only be for people who want a compact license. So you wouldn't need to do a background check on every single person who applies to the state board. It would just be if you want to get an interstate compact license.
Thank you for that. Let me just clarify if I'm hearing you correctly, and I've heard this question many times, so I want to make sure we all understand this. If you live in a state that currently does not have background check requirements, or maybe you are at a licensure level where there is no exam requirement, your state could start instituting a practice where those who want to be in the compact could take the exam and qualify, could get a background check and qualify. Is that true? Did I get you right?
So we've broken out the compact into two different sections. So there's everything over here that the practitioner has to do, and then there's everything that the state has to do. We do have a requirement that the state has to have a background check a background check process in place, and so it wouldn't be if they don't currently have a background check process in place, they would need to implement one in order to be a member of the compact. But there is other compacts have given a kind of grace period, usually a couple years, recognizing it takes time to set up this process. And so you can, like in the PT compact, for example, you can pass the PT compact, be a member, and implement your background check process over the course of a couple years. So you can get that stood up as from the state side, you can get that stood up. So you don't have to implement it straight away. You can still pass the compact and just implement those things after the fact.
Okay. So states may have to implement practices they don't currently have in place so that social workers could follow these processes and be in the compact. And that has
Correct.
happened, with other
Mhm.
compacts.
Yeah, and again, we went where there was the most uniformity. So there's, almost all states require the ASWB exam for licensure, and so that's why it just made sense to include that as a provision. And so, compacts thrive on uniformity. So the more states that have a particular practice around licensing, the easier it is for a state to want to join a compact.
Mm-hmm. So Mark had asked if a state wanted to opt in, is that a rule that the regulatory body would pass? I'm not exactly sure what Mark is asking there. So
Yeah, I think I understand. So to join the compact, is that a rule that the regulatory body passes, or is it done through statute? And the answer is it's done through your state legislature. So in order to join, it's not an action that your state board takes, it's an action that your state legislator takes. So you would need to pass through the legislative process.
Well, I was wondering if Mark was asking about the opt-in provision for the license transfer.
That's what I was thinking he was maybe
that would
talking
just be
about.
a
Can you
board
talk about that part?
Yes.
Dan, did you want to talk about that?
Oh, that would be board action. If the board wants to take that on, they can just say that we're taking that on. You wouldn't have to go back to the legislature to activate that part of the compact.
Oh, good. Mark followed up. Great. All right.
Okay. So in terms of requirements for supervision, who and in which state? So if I'm hearing you correctly, we have to follow the supervision requirements in our home state. Period.
Yes. Yep. So you
Okay.
you complete the supervision requirements for your home state. You get your home state license, and then that punches your ticket to be eligible to practice in other remote states. So all you
But
have to
in
do
terms of
is supervision for your home state.
and in terms of who supervises whom across states, there's a lot of differentiation across all of our states. What's allowed, what's not. Can I supervise these folks? Who can supervise whom? It all comes back to what the rules are in your home state. Okay. Go ahead, Sarah. Sarah, I can't hear you.
Just to clarify, if a practitioner was in the middle of the process of their supervision and moves during that time, so they have an entry-level LMSW license and they are working towards their independent clinical licensure and they move, they would, I would imagine, have to work that out with the licensing authority in the state in which they're moving. Is that correct?
I believe we discussed that, and I think that is the consensus of the group, that we talked about how states do reciprocity with clinical supervision hours and things like that, and whether they recognize supervision hours in other states. And yeah, that is something that is not explicitly addressed in the compact. It's left to the state licensure boards to determine that this person qualifies for this license in our state based
Right.
on the supervision hours they've presented us with.
Yep. So basically the supervisee is not submitting any paperwork to the compact. They're only ever supervisor, whomever it is, you're only submitting paperwork in your home state. And so you're following whatever regulations exist in your home state. I hope that answers your question, Tricia. Let's talk about the domicile and border state issues and then costs separately, because these are really two big things. So lots of people asking these pieces about domicile, border state. I live in one place, I practice in one place, I have a license in both. Then someone in the chat was saying, okay, I live in this state, I'm licensed there, I'm moving to this other place. How does that work? Let's just have a clarifying moment on, we know we can only get into the compact through our home state. So if you move and the state you move to does not have the compact, basically you're out. Correct?
Yes, correct.
Okay.
And again, this is how it's currently drafted. And so if you have feedback on these particular provisions, we'd love to hear it. There's a lot of reasons why, from a legal standpoint, it's important to have the license be issued by the home state. I think it would get a little bit too in the weeds and legalese for this audience, but we're happy to talk about it if there's interest. But yes, you're required to be licensed by your home state, and so if you moved to a non-compact state, then you would lose your interstate compact license, essentially, because we can't really expect a state that's not in the compact to recognize that license, because they didn't join the compact. Maybe that was an intentional decision not to join the compact, so we can't really hold them to any of the provisions.
That is a tricky point and sticky point for a lot of social workers, especially as people are moving across the country. In this question of, okay, I got licensed here, I got in the compact, I have clients now all over the country in these certain places where I'm licensed, and my family's moving, and now I can no longer access those clients in the same way I was. And that's really tricky. And I heard you all say in your session, I think it was Monday this week, where you talked about the only caveat to that in the way the draft is currently written is families who are military families. And so once they have a license through the compact, they get to keep it and carry it with them. Is that true? Do you want to speak
Yes,
to that?
with the one caveat that they're moving between compact member states.
Okay.
So you've got to be, in order for the compact license to be valid and recognized, you got to be moving between two member states, because again, we can't hold other states to a compact that they chose not to join.
And folks, this is really part of the legal part of this whole thing, is that the compact can only go as far as the states that have approved it. And so there's some, as much as we all want to have access in all these states, it's going to come back to us getting the compact passed in each of our states so that people have access across the country. And as we continue to move around, that would be ideal. Let's talk about costs a little bit and explain to the audience how the costs work in some of the other compacts that you've seen. What do those look like? Are we paying an additional fee? Are states increasing their licensure fees or adding a separate fee for people who want to join the compact? How does this usually work? Because it's not written in the compact. Let's be clear about that up front. The fees
Yeah.
themselves, there are no fees written into the compact draft because that gets drafted by the commission later.
Yeah, so we leave it up to the states to decide what they want to set their fee at. So every state's going to charge a fee for an interstate compact license, and each state is it's up to them to whatever they set that fee at. I'll say from our perspective, working with a lot of the other compacts, it's pretty comparable to just your standard license fee. So it's not an exorbitant amount. It's not going to exceed what the state currently charges for a regular license. Sometimes it might be a little bit more because you're gaining quite a bit of value in being able to practice in so many states, but it's not like it's 2 times more or anything like that. So
So you're
Dan,
saying it's okay,
sorry,
Matt.
I saw Dan unmuted. Did you have anything else to add to the fees part?
Oh, well, I mean, just that, it's up to the states. I wish I could tell you they won't. States raise fees sometimes for reasons that practitioners are like, why are we raising the fee? But they may charge a higher fee for the compact license because, they say, well, we're doing some more administrative work to process these background checks or something like that. But if you look at nursing, you don't see a dramatically higher fee for the compact license. And in some instances, you don't see a higher fee for the compact license opposed to a single state license where you're only practicing in the state. So, that's just something where the practitioners are probably going to have to advocate to the board. If they set the cost too high, no one's going to use the compact and it's going to fail. So that's something that we reiterate continually to the board. It's like, you can't see this as, a revenue generator. Certainly you want to cover your costs, but it's not a way for the board to generate income. And with the other professions, that hasn't been a problem.
And in terms of costs, the commission itself has some costs. They're going to have some staff likely. They're going to have a data system. They're going to have some things that they have to establish in order to be the hub of compact information across the country. And that's part of what states have to cover when you're saying they have to cover their costs. They're also probably going to have some paperwork and that sort of thing to ensure that they're meeting all the compact requirements. If I'm hearing you correctly, when you say it's not significantly different than your home state license fee, it's not going to be covered in your home state license fee. It'd be like, I'm renewing my license in Minnesota, I pay my license renewal, and then I pay an additional chunk of money in order to be a compact licensee. Is that how it's normally working?
That's how it would work, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
As far as the commission goes, the data system will be the most expensive item. I mean, that can be $1 to $2 million. And that's important. I mean, again, we need to protect the board's ability to protect the public. And so that data system plays a critical role. As far as staff, there's 3 million nurses in America. The nursing compact has 1.5 employees. The PT has 1 employee. These things typically aren't very staff heavy, again, because that data system does so much work. And this model, especially, you're not really asking the compact commission to process privileges or things like that. So, I think probably get away with not a lot of staff. States have been willing to give professions these mechanisms, but what they haven't been willing so far to do is pay for them. So, the other compacts rely on funds from outside organizations, membership organizations, board federations. You can't necessarily count on this, but there is a lot of excitement in Washington about the social work compact. Social work professionals use telehealth more than any other profession. There's a lot of concern at HHS and HRSA about meeting the needs of folks with substance use disorders. And so, I think there'll be the ability, we're certainly going to advocate for this, to create grant programs from the federal government. We're also talking with DOD. HRSA is another good avenue to create grant programs. There's already a bill that's been filed in Congress. I don't think it's going to go anywhere this year, but it's good that it was filed. I think it's Representative or Congressman Nasw from Colorado, to create a grant program specifically for mental health professions that have a compact. So, can't guarantee you're going to get a grant, but, you stand a much better chance than occupational therapists.
So with that was a perfect segue into our next question, which is, how does all of the compact stuff relate to reimbursement rates? And I wanted to ask Sarah to chime in a little bit related to larger policy conversations happening right now. How does the compact affect reimbursement rates?
Okay. And I apologize for not knowing this. Do social workers get reimbursed from Medicare, Medicaid?
That's what Sarah's going to talk about, Dan.
Okay. Well,
yeah.
So a couple years ago, the short answer is yes, but it's complicated. So a couple of years ago, CMS was causing some problems with PT not wanting to reimburse. They were confused about, how the compact worked, and they use a privilege model. The PT compact and the Federation of State Boards of Physical Therapy met with CMS over 6 months and got all that worked out. Because CMS issued guidance and now they're working on a rule, typically state Medicaid programs, although you have to explain it to them, from what I've heard from PT, is they'll fall in line. Typically, insurance companies, again, you might have to show them the CMS guidance or work with them, but it's really only Arizona that's causing a problem. Now, as to reimbursement rates, that's one of the reasons that Hawaii doesn't want to pass any compacts, is because they're concerned because their reimbursement rates, it's so high, and so is Alaska. But typically, the other compacts haven't seen issues where you have, practitioners only going to states that have a higher reimbursement rate. I don't think the variance is so big that it would create that kind of behavior. Maybe it would, but the other compacts haven't seen it, especially SIPAC hasn't seen it, and again, PT hasn't seen it. So typically, there's not going to be any problems with insurance, Medicaid, Medicare. You might have to do some explaining, especially the insurance companies. Again, in all the states that PT's in, they're paying, except Arizona, and you just have a couple of problem providers there.
Okay, thanks, Dan. Sarah, do you have any follow-up on that one?
Yes, I do.
Go ahead.
First, I just want to say, Dan, it's not a mistake that members of Congress, our federal agencies, and the administration are supportive of mental health and behavioral health providers. We are advocating every day on behalf of the workforce, and obviously we've been effective. And I think that has definitely contributed to why there's willingness to invest in our profession and to fund the development of this compact. I think also that Congress would like to allow for greater interstate practice because of the tremendous benefit of access to telehealth services, especially in rural areas. I want to just mention that in the beginning of this discussion, I talked about us being in a kind of transformative time for social work practice, and practice is indeed changing. And so this compact has to serve us for years to come. And so, yes, there may be impacts on reimbursement rates. That's part of navigating a new practice environment where there's much greater access. The advocate community in Washington, D.C. right now is advocating for parity in Medicare, and ASW has been a leader in those efforts, and to cover other mental and behavioral health providers in the full continuum of substance use disorder and behavioral health services in Medicare. So we are aware of this. We will continue to advocate for the reimbursement rates of our workforce and our scope of practice, not only in Medicare and Medicaid, but also in commercial insurance.
Thanks for that, Sarah. I know this is really complicated, and some folks in the chat and sending me messages and things are like, okay, I still don't get it. And there's several things we've talked about tonight that I think people are starting to get some clarity on, and others that are still a little bit gray. This whole thing is a little bit amorphous to us. I see another question coming up here. We're going to take this last question, and then I'm going to answer a few things as quickly as I can and close us up for the night. So we'll just go a couple minutes over, folks, if you can hang out. So Kristen's asking for MSW that hold an LMSW in the state of Michigan that were grandfathered in following the transition from certification to licensure. Will they still have to take the ASWB licensure exam to be considered eligible for interstate licensure? I know the CSG team and I have talked at length about this one. Do y'all want to talk about how the whole grandfathering or blanketing in provisions will affect people's ability to partake in the compact?
Sure, yeah, and this was a big discussion with the development team, is not wanting to require that those who have held an active and unencumbered license for a long time, and maybe they were licensed prior to when the ASWB exam was required, that those people would be punished and have to go back and retake the exam. So really, the exam requirement is for current and future licensees, but there is the provision there for the commission to draft a rule that would have a blanketing provision for those who were licensed prior to their state requiring the ASWB exam. So we've got kind of a placeholder there in the language for the commission to go and draft a rule that can get a little bit more specific.
And there are several things that we've heard along the way that sort of get devolved to the commission to write rules on, make decisions on. And I know that's concerning. This one in particular is concerning to me. I've done a ton of research on licensure exemptions. We do a lot of blanketing in when we eliminate exemptions in states. And there are thousands of social workers across the country who are licensed without taking an exam or meeting all of the requirements we're talking about. And so this is a huge one that we've talked about. And I think we'll continue to discuss it. At this point, the way it's written in the draft, it is waiting for the commission to write rules on it, basically. So thank you for that. Just a couple of follow-up things that our communications team is sharing some links to where you can find some more information, where you can find the slides after tonight's event. We are going to have a follow-up event coming up. I want to say just a couple other pieces about timeline and that sort of thing, and standardization. Some questions we just couldn't get to in the time that we have. People had asked, with the compact, will there be standardization of credentials? Not necessarily. The hope is that there will be a compact credential, but it will still be allowed that every state set their own letters behind your names, basically. So that is a tricky thing here, and the compact does not supersede whatever it is that your state has in place for credentialing. In terms of timeline and the next steps with this whole compact, folks, we have a bit of time here. It is now almost the end of July. The CSG team has said the compact public comment period will be open for a couple of months. Has there been a closing date set on that, Matt, Keith, Dan?
Our tentative date is kind of mid-September, but really we keep it open if there's a significant amount of interest still going on in September. We'll keep it open for a few more weeks. So really we kind of gauge when the process is over, when we stop getting engagement from members of the profession. So
okay. And what is the process from there for making any edits to the draft, and what will that look like for folks?
Yeah, so we'll like Dan said, catalog all of the feedback that we've gotten. I'm sure it'll be probably thousands of comments, and we'll share all of that with the drafting team. They'll make updates to the compact as needed, and then we'll share a final draft with that technical assistance group, that broader group, and there's always consensus on the final draft between the two groups. So we'll have a bit of a back and forth if we need to, based on any changes that were made, and then we'll come to a consensus on the final draft.
Okay. So in the next several weeks, we are going to have several next steps planned internally at NASW. We're having some internal discussion with our NASW chapter executive directors, our chapter presidents, and hearing from our chapter boards and members across the country in all sorts of ways. We'll also be responding to the proposed draft legislation, and we'll be updating the FAQs on our website at socialworkers.org as we learn more. So you can see the links in the chat from our team on how to follow what NASW is talking about related to our thoughts related to the compact. We also invite you to join us again on August 31st. We'll have another session from 5:30 to 7 o'clock Eastern Time, another Facebook Live regarding the compact draft. Some have asked, will it be a repeat of tonight's session? Will it be something different? Folks, it has to be something different because this is an ever-evolving thing. And a month from now, to be honest, I have no idea exactly what questions we're still going to have, what more information people are going to want to know. Our sense would be that we'd have some sense of kind of what we're hearing across the country, what we'd like to share back with all of you also. So I hope you will join us. You're welcome. I'm so glad we've answered so many of your questions tonight. We are a few minutes over, so I appreciate you taking your time with us, folks. Thank you to Angela Mclean, our CEO, Sarah Butts, and our team from CSG, Keith, Matt, and Dan, for joining us tonight and sharing so much insight into the compact. We know this really matters for your practice, social workers. We hope that we provide lots of opportunities for you to hear what's happening, provide feedback, and be engaged in the process. And we'll do our best to keep you up to speed along the way. Thanks for being with us tonight, folks. Enjoy your evening. We'll see you soon.